See, today we are going to discuss the concept of Bharatvarsha in pre-modern or in pre-British era and the emergence of modern nationalism under the British rule. What is Bharat? Varsh means country or the area. So what is Bharat? See, according to Vishnu Puran, we here see the country that lies north of the ocean and south of the snowy mountains is called Bharatam, and there dwell the descendants of Bharatas. Now see, as we know, nationalism is a modern phenomenon. It is a modern phenomenon and it came into being after a historical change of immense consequences. If it is a modern phenomenon, then what was the concept of nationalism in pre-British era? That what we call this Bharatvarsh. See, in modern sense of term, nationalism means a sense of oneness, or we say a sense of common political existence. Common political existence. See, this nationalism emerged first in Britain as a result of the growth of trade and manufacturing activities. It emerged first in Britain as compared to the rest of the Europe because of its peculiar condition. There was a brisk trade going on in Britain along with manufacturing abilities. And what happened? That for a nationalism to emerge, some material prerequisites are required. What are those prerequisites? At first is the economic unification of a country. And this is achieved on the basis of 2 or 3 concepts. Number one is that the people of that country must be bound within a single exchange relationship, means a single economic relationship or a unified system of exchange relationship. And number second, a centralized state, existence of a centralized state with all pervading bureaucracy. Now what will happen? That this single exchange relationship will bind different communities into one, and this will be possible only after the establishment of rapid means of transport and communication. And its totality, what will happen? A brisk exchange relationship along with the movement of people will facilitate the movement of ideas, and here the people will feel that we are one. So these are the material conditions for the emergence of nationalism in modern sense of term. Now this nationalism started in 17th and continued in 18th and 19th in the Europe, and in the Asian context, it continued in 20th century, still continuing in some countries. So now, just compare this material situation with India. What will happen, or what happened that before the British came? See, this material condition was created by the Britishers. It were the Britishers who introduced fundamental, or you can say revolutionary changes in our economic system by the introduction of the concept of private property in land and the demand of land revenue in cash, and the creation of a centralized state system and the establishment of rapid means of transport and communications in the form of railways and buses and roads and an all pervading bureaucracy at the lowest level from top to the bottom. There was only one rule. So these material conditions were created by the British. What happened after this? Once these material prerequisites came into existence, this produced newly awakened social classes, newly awakened social classes or groups such as proletariat, capitalist, bureaucrats, peasants. Peasants were earlier also in India, but they were not bound with one economic exchange relationship. So under the British, the peasants, and before the British, there is much difference. So now these newly awakened social groups became conscious of the current situation of India. They developed a national outlook with national aspirations. So it is their national aspiration and the British imperial interest clashed with each other. So we can say that the antagonistic relationship between the newly awakened social classes and the British colonial interests created nationalism in India. Okay? Clear? What I told you, that for the creation of a common national political existence, some material prerequisites are required. For example, different communities should be welded into a single system of exchange relationship. This means unified economic system, a centralized state, bureaucracy with rapid means of communication and transport, which will facilitate movements of ideas and goods. This will create, in turn, the feeling of oneness among different communities. And this feeling of oneness will create nationalism or national outlook. What is a nation? Nation is a joint effort by its citizens, joint efforts by the people of that country. So these material prerequisites were not present in pre-British India. Therefore, now the question is, then what is the implication of the concept of Bharatvarsh in pre-modern India? If there were no material existence or material prerequisites, then what was the implication of Bharatvarsh? How was India? How was Indian society? How it was governed? How it was regulated? What type of exchange relations was there in India before the British? Now let us examine. Before the British, India was, for the centuries there existed self-sufficient, self-ruled villages. See, India was dotted with a number of villages. All these villages were self-sufficient. Means whatever they required were produced in the villages. Because India by that time was regulated by the caste rules, and caste was occupational groups. So every caste performed its caste assigned work, and thus exchange relationship was maintained. So every village was self-sufficient and also self-ruled, means villages were governed by their own caste panchayats or village panchayats. Not only this, these villages were isolated from each other. These villages were isolated from each other. If one village was self-sufficient, then why it will have any type of exchange relation with other villages if it was self-sufficient? So these villages were not only self-sufficient and self-ruled, but they were isolated from each other. And what was its consequences? If village was self-sufficient, this means they did not have any tangible contact with outside world, or especially any tangible economic contact with outside world. No tangible contact with tangible economic contact with outside world. And if villagers are not in the need to have any contact with the outside world, this means they will also no, there will be no requirement of a rapid, or you can say an efficient means of transport and communication. Efficient means of transport and communication. Okay. So this was the condition. India was dotted with self-sufficient villages. There was no efficient transport and communication system. In fact, there was no need, no contact with outside world. So in its consequences, what will emerge? The outlook of the village, the outlook or the thinking pattern of village people will become narrow. The entire village life was enshrouded in mysticism, superstitions, and worshipping of a range of deities connected with nature. Why this happened? Because if you don't have contact with any outside world, and with your outlook and thinking pattern very narrow, you will not be able to face any challenges that will emerge from time to time in the form of either flood or epidemic or drought. So in this condition of darkness of thought, or you can say obscurantism, the people will try to solve their problem on the basis of superstitions. So this happened in the villages. And see, whether it was a period of political unification under some our glorious rulers like Ashoka and Chandragupta II and Samudragupta, and later on Mughals, nothing changed, because Indian rulers never tried to exercise their political or any economic or ideological influence or control into the villages. The incessant wars were fought among the rulers, not to exercise control into the villages, but to have a control over the villages. Who will levy taxes in these areas? This was their motive. And for the villages, a change in rule, what implied? This means different claimants of land revenue came at different intervals, and nothing new. So, what I wanted to say, that either in the period of political unification under our glorious rulers, or during the period of political fragmentation, as we witnessed between 8th to 12th century AD, village life continued as before. So there were also another factors that governed the village life, that were responsible for this narrow outlook of the village. See, every village was inhabited by a number of castes, and for the villagers, castes and their occupations were divinely ordained. So, on the one hand, no one dared to challenge the caste rules, or no one dared to deviate from the caste rules. And second, this caste assigned duties left no scope for individual initiative or scientific inventions, or suggest a new type of socio-economic structuring of society to take it to a higher level. This was not possible. You can say caste system created an insulating impulse over which any type of critical inquiry was failed to develop, was failed to go on or travel. Nothing was possible. So this was the state of affairs in pre-British India. This means there were no material conditions present in pre-British India. Then what was again, the question arises, then what was the concept of Bharatvarsh? See what happened in many historical periods, like ancient, medieval, or at different intervals, different centuries, there emerged a number of religious leaders, some with revolutionary zeal. And these leaders preached or advocated oneness of mankind. Number one thing, oneness of mankind, like Kabir and Nanak, Sankaracharya, okay. And on the other hand, some religious sects with, or some religious leaders with revolutionary zeals who tried to found a society on egalitarian basis, like Buddhism, Jainism, etc. Okay, egalitarian society. Okay, but see, all these revolutionary leaders or sects or preachers worked under the broad framework of Hinduism, and were assimilative in nature. So, in spite of antagonistic to each other, these religions were finally assimilative. No one tried to break away the basics of Hinduism. So what happened? Under the influence of different leaders or different religious sects, the village people shifted their loyalty to different religious sects. Suppose this village was Vaishnava, now under the influence of Shaivas they became Shaiva. Later on they became Jainas or Buddhist or whatsoever. None of these religious teachers, although they preached oneness of mankind, but they did not challenge the caste system as such. So the village life continued as before along the lines of caste duties. So this was the condition. What positive things these leaders did for India was that they strengthened the feeling of religio-ideological unity. Okay? These leaders failed to take the village people or the people of India to a higher level of economic, social, or political existence, because the material consciousness was not present there. Now, the British rule will come, and it were the Britishers who established a centralized state with all pervading bureaucracy, tied India into one or single economic system. Entire India was tied into same system of, or one system of exchange relationship. This started economic unification of India, and political unification plus bureaucratic unification. The British also introduced some modern education system with some liberties, with some individual liberties, plus press. Along with all these things, the establishment of rapid means of communication in the form of railways, buses, plus roads, started brisk movement of goods and people and ideology. This created feeling of oneness. Now see, now here starts the modern, the idea of nationalism in true sense of term. These are the material conditions: economic unification, political unification, bureaucratic unification, and rapid means of communication and transport. These are the material conditions, or you can say these are the prerequisite material conditions for nationalism to emerge. So all these started a feeling of, or created a feeling of oneness. We Indians now juxtaposed against Britishers. This feeling that we are Indians and Britishers are ruling over us, this started nationalism in India. So what we will say finally? Finally, we will say that the implication of Bharatvarsh, implication of the concept of Bharatvarsh in pre-British India was a religio-ideological unity of India. In the absence of material conditions prerequisite or required for the emergence of nationalism on a material basis was not present. So, not only in India but in the entire world, in the ancient and medieval period, nowhere nationalism could emerge, because nowhere in the world these material conditions were present. So in the absence of material condition, whether it is a political leadership or it is a religious leadership, no one can work for the emergence of material condition of the nationalism. So what we will say, that the concept of Bharatvarsh in pre-modern age implies the religio-ideological unity of India. Okay? Now summarize it. What I said, nationalism is a modern concept. It requires the feeling of oneness, and this feeling of oneness can be generated only after the unification of different communities into a single system of exchange relationship. And this single system of exchange relationship is possible only after the establishment of a centralized state, along with bureaucracy and rapid means of transport and communication system. All these will weld different communities into a nation. All these will facilitate brisk movement of goods and ideas from one corner to another corner. And this will broaden the outlook of the people much enough to fight against the feudal edifices of the medieval period. It were these people who fought against the kingship or feudal elements and snatched for themselves the right to free speech and individualism and right of the common man. So, in nationalism, it is not the king and the subject, it is the relationship between the state and its citizens. In nationalism, state is the joint creation of all the citizens. So from here we'll start the democratic values. Okay? So what we saw that in spite of religio-ideological ideology, unity of religio-ideological unity, no one was capable enough to create material conditions. So the village life continued as before. The village life continued as before in the absence of any impulse from outside. That's why we see the continuation of the same bullock-driven plow and hand-manipulated tools for the manufacture of goods. These were not enough to take the people at higher level of economic existence. So, with the coming of British, the material condition for the emergence of nationalism will emerge, and finally, nationalism in its true sense will emerge in India. So, I think all the points relating to the concept of Bharatvarsh and its implications in pre-modern India is now clear to all of you. Any question? So, I am giving you the question. Write an essay on the concept of Bharatvarsh. Write an essay on the concept of Bharatvarsh, not more than in 1,000 words. And 800 words will also do, but try to write in 1,000 words. And then I will provide my answers.